So we kind of moved on from glucose-centric approach to a patient-centric approach. Now, there have been so many trials out there for type 2 diabetes that it becomes extremely hard to say, okay, what should be the choice of therapy? It is becoming very patient-centric, so our patient is at the center, and our management completely depends on, okay, what are the patient's needs? And these needs have been made easier to assess by guideline statements. Now, this is the latest consensus statement from the diabetes societies. They say that our first-line therapy for type 2 diabetes is still metformin with comprehensive lifestyle changes. But if HbA1c is still high, you proceed further. What should be the next step? The next step depends on patient's history because it's a patient-centric approach. If the patient has got established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or chronic kidney disease, then SGLT2 and GLP-1 should be our predominant therapies. If the patient doesn't have previous atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or chronic kidney disease, then you look at these three parameters. Do you have a compelling need to minimize hypoglycemia? Is there a compelling need to prioritize weight loss, or if there's a problem like cost, like patient is perhaps in the NHS or maybe in the third world countries. So these are our key guides towards choice of therapy. Now let's look at the first kind of step here. Now, if the patient has got established cardiovascular disease, all right, or chronic kidney disease, then we would either choose GLP-1 or SGLT2. For chronic kidney disease and heart failure, the evidence is more deviated towards SGLT2 as our first line these days. And then we go towards GLP-1 as our second line. So these are add-on therapies. And if HbA1c is still high, you kind of intensify it further in a stepwise way. Similarly, if you are kind of having a patient who does not have previous atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, meaning they don't have previous MI, they don't have angina, they don't have ischemic heart disease, they don't have history of TIA or strokes, or they don't have chronic kidney disease, they have no proteinuria, they don't have any drop in their EGFR, then we are fairly happy. Okay, we can start with other priorities. So is there a compelling need to prevent hypoglycemia? In that scenario, you have got a variety of combinations. You've got DPP4, gliptins, you've got GLP-1s, the liraglutide, semaglutide, and dulaglutide group. You've got SGLT2, the gliflozins, and you still have the thiazolidinediones. Although rosiglitazone was the culprit to start the FDA mandate for CV safety data, but we still have pioglitazone in the market. Rosi is gone out of the market. But this is hardly used by endocrinologists these days because we have better drugs to minimize hypoglycemia. So you can see these are all hyponeutral drugs. And these are preferred choices for elderly patients or someone with mental health issues or someone who has got repeated hypos and they have type 2 diabetes. Now we're talking about type 2 here because for type 1, it is just insulin, okay? And you can see if HbA1c is still above target, we then intensify it further. Now, if there is a fat type 2 diabetic patient and there's a compelling need to promote weight loss, they are very insulin resistant, then these are our key choices. We either use GLP-1 receptor agonist or we use SGLT2 inhibitor. Again, it has to be a patient-centered approach because you know that SGLT2 are tablet forms, GLP-1s are injectable forms, so injection will not be the acceptable option for a majority of patients. So we just give them the choice, or we look at the other priorities and decide which should be the best option. If you ask me which would cause more weight loss, it would be GLP-1 as opposed to SGLT2. And sometimes we use combination of both to achieve the required benefits. The last thing about the cost, which I think is also an important factor in some countries of the world, then sulfonylureas are still one of the cheapest add-on medication, and thiazolidinediones, which is pioglitazone, are also extremely cheap. They can still be used fairly easily among patients with type 2 diabetes. but there would be additional side effects like hypoglycemia and weight gain with sulfonylureas. And again, with thiazolidinedione, so it will be weight gain, heart failure, osteoporosis, and that compromise comes with the cost. The whole algorithm, as you can see, is it's very neat and it is very structured. This is the first time we had quite a nice consensus statement from different guidelines. This was ADA and EASD who kind of sat together and brought it up, and it is expanding. It keeps expanding. Every few years we have more guidelines. Now, a lot of times our patients with diabetes, even if it is type 2 diabetes, they need to go on injectables, which is not the most acceptable treatment option for patients, but they need to have it. The injectable may not be just insulin, it can be GLP-1, and actually our preference is GLP-1. And we try to start it prior to insulin because it is hyponeutral, it promotes weight loss. Weight is the main problem in type 1 diabetes. If GLP-1 doesn't help improve the HbA1c targets, then we can add basal insulin. And from last week, you remember basal insulin was the long-acting insulin. If the patient is already on GLP-1, then obviously we go straight on basal insulin, or the other option is that you could use combination of basal insulin and GLP-1 in one fixed ratio combination pen. So we have got new pens in which you would have a GLP-1 plus a basal insulin together, and that can avoid the necessity of multiple injections in certain group of patients, and these also prevent the weight gain associated with basal insulin. If the HbA1c is still high despite these steps, then the next step is usually prandial insulin. Prandial insulin is the bolus insulin, or the insulin that's supposed to be given before meals. That is the rapid or short-acting insulin, as we discussed last time. We can always start with one dose and then up titrate in a stepwise way to make sure that the target glucose readings are achieved. Again, basal and prandial insulins can be mixed in the same pan, so you have got pre-mixed formulations or biphasic insulin, but there's high risk of hypoglycemia and weight gain with those combinations. The best insulin regime for poorly controlled diabetes is always basal bolus insulin regime, as we discussed last time. So if you do have someone using multiple therapies, remember type 2 diabetes is very patient-centered. It is involving stepwise approach and use of multiple combination therapies to achieve the goals for the patient. So your patient may be on SGLT2 inhibitor. This is just like a traffic light system for you to remember. If you want to use SGLT2 inhibitor for someone with established disease, this is fantastic drug to add on. We've got fantastic data, but remember, this drug is associated with euglycemic diabetic ketoacidosis, because we know this drug can increase the glucagon levels, which can impair the ratio of insulin and glucagon and lead to DKA even if the patient is type 2 diabetic. So we instruct them about sick day rules, anything that would increase ketones, for example, starvation, fasting for religious purposes, or if they are having a lengthy fast for an elective operation, we hold off SGLT2 inhibitors. Metformin, absolutely fine whenever you're intensifying with injectables. There is no problem with metformin at all. DPP-4, again, we must remember that incretin-based therapies, if you're using, you just use one, either DPP-4 or GLP-1. So if you're going on an injectable GLP-1, you don't want to combine it with DPP-4 inhibitors. So if someone is on sitagliptin or linagliptin, and you want to start them on liraglutide, then you must make sure the gliptins must be stopped. The sulfonylurea. So sulfonylureas are drugs which can provoke hypoglycemia. If you have got a patient whom you're starting on insulin and it is basal insulin, I would always suggest either consider stopping sulfonylurea, or if it is still required, reduce the dose by 50%. And I would never ever use a sulfonylurea with prandial insulin or pre-mixed insulin, because there is no point. Sulfonylurea just releases the insulin from the pancreas. The response of subcut insulin becomes variable and extremely unpredictable when combined with sulfonylurea. You can use it with basal, but not with prandial, never with prandial. The glitazones, again, these are less favored drugs these days. We try to stop them when we are commencing on insulin, because their role is to make your body sensitive to your own insulin. So there's no point continuing this drug, which will also make them put on weight and cause osteoporosis and fluid retention and heart failure. So not a preferred choice. So if you have a patient who has got cardiovascular history, in that case, intensification should ideally be with GLP-1 receptor agonist, which would be preferred over insulin. But if the patient has got symptomatic hyperglycemia, again, if they have got significant renal impairment, the only choice you would have would be insulin, because the majority of drugs cannot be used alongside extremely low EGFR, with the exception of SGLT2 inhibitors, which I think would be beyond the scope of this audience, and that is something which endocrine registrars should know, because newest trials are showing SGLT2 inhibitors can prevent diabetic nephropathy.
Off your mobile. If you think this concept is fascinating or helpful to you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Endocrinology and Diabetes Simplified. I'm Dr. Jawad Bashir. I'm a consultant endocrinologist who has dedicated time to make medical education simplified for my trainees. If you've got any particular topics in endocrinology that you want the videos to be made, please scribble them in the comment section. Thank you.